Law, Jefferson. Study men.
I do remember the last time I saw her. She was standing on an auction block.
We intend for independence.
He tells me that he wants liberty and equality.
But fear within a city.
A free white Englishwoman.
Of course, Lord Cornwallis himself.
Friends, you have been a delight. It is always a pleasure.
The dignity and worth of human personality.
Fanny! Come. Close the door. Fanny, I have just read something of interest in the Gazette. Do you know of what I speak? It is a Runaway ad. Your son has run again, Fanny. Is he here? Is Isaac here, Fanny? When he ran before he came here to Williamsburg, I have young sons of my own. If they were to ask for my help, could I deny them? If they were wrong, as Isaac is wrong, perhaps I could. Fanny, Isaac is not a free man. He was born of your body. You are a slave, and therefore he is a slave. Just because he wishes his place in society to be different does not make it so. Oh, Fanny. There was a time that I adored you. But you are my property, and boundaries must be maintained. There was a time I wondered what it might be like to free you. But God has placed us on this earth according to his will. There was a time that I told you my deepest secrets. And now you must tell me yours. Fanny, the consequences are dire. You and I both know these things cannot be changed. If I go into those corridors and I find your son, do not interrupt me. If your son is found on this property, you will both be punished. Do you understand? Good. Go.
Hello, and welcome to our Women's History Month live stream, live from history to her heirs forever. My name is Wright, and I'm an actor-interpreter with the Museum Theater Department, and today I'm joined by my dear friend and colleague, Michelle Greensmith.
I'm so happy to be here with you, Hope.
I am so happy to be here too. You all were treated to a segment of Michelle's amazing My Story, My Voice program. So those of you who have joined us in person or on our live streams might be familiar with this. These are going to be individuals from history who might not be as well known, And usually you get to meet these individuals at a pivotal moment in their life where things are going to change or things are going to be very different from the point you meet them. The treat with Anne Blair is that you get to see her in several of these pivotal moments throughout her life. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I chose to explore, like you said, several pivotal moments through her life leading up to that particular point that the program begins and ends with. And so it was really a fun exercise in digging into resources in particular parts of her life and finding out what sorts of things influenced her along the way, and to get to explore who this person is throughout such a wide swath of time.
Yeah, because sometimes it's hard to narrow it down to just one thing.
Yeah.
Actually, we're going to move to a video to kind of talk a little bit about how we write these My Story, My Voices, but we ask you to stay with us. We'll be back in a couple of minutes and think about questions that you might have for Michelle or myself.
So typically the first thing I do when crafting a program, it sort of depends on the program, but this piece in particular, My Story, My Voice, I had a kind of like image inspiration, sort of how it would look, maybe how it would feel. It kind of felt like cinematic to me, and I knew I wanted snippets of Anne Blair's life to speak to the theme that I was planning to explore. And I chose Anne Blair, although Anne has been in the rotation of people who have been portrayed here at Colonial Williamsburg for lots of years. And I had the benefit of getting to take research that others have gathered on Anne in particular, and also the Blair family. I had the benefit to gather from all sorts of different places. I wish I had a number, but I pulled lots and lots of resources to weave into this My Story, My Voice. And because it spans lots of years, age 10 to into her 40s, I was able to pull a good number of Blair family records. There's lots and lots of Blair family papers. They're housed, the original documents are housed down at Swem Library at the College of William and Mary. And then what I couldn't pull directly from her words, her family's words, I started pulling sources around her, sermons of the time period that I have documentation that were spoken and printed, laws, that sort of thing, lots of varied sources.
Thank you all, and thank you for your questions. I'm going to go right to questions because you all have some really good ones. Sam would like to know, how long did it take for you to write your My Story, My Voice?
How long did it take to write? Well, the research portion and the writing portion are different. So research is its own beast, and that takes quite a bit of time. How long have you researched people? Years. Years and years. Yeah, like one person over the course of years. Yeah, same with Anne. But the writing process is a little bit different, and I think this particular program took me about 6 months. Idea to first draft, and of course things change as you get into more research, different research, exploring different parts of something that you thought you might not dig very far into, that you decide you actually do really want to dig into. 6 months for the first draft, and then as things changed, I got a chance to relook at it and overhaul some things. It's an ongoing process, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, I think a phrase I heard that I think applies to what we do, art is never complete, it's only abandoned. So we get to a point where we have to come to a final draft with things, but it can be very difficult. I do My Story, My Voice as well as a woman named Hannah, who was enslaved to the last royal governor of Virginia, Lord Dunmore. And I knew what moment I wanted to explore, Hannah's thoughts and ideas. That was the night before she and about 50 other enslaved individuals are due to be auctioned off. This was done to raise money for the war effort for the Virginians. And I had already been researching Hannah, and I've researched her for years, and I'm still not done. There's always something to learn. So my first draft was about a 12-page single-spaced document that could have easily been an hour, but working within the parameters, I got it down to about an 8-page, 25-minute piece over probably about the same amount of time, about the course of about 6 months or so.
Yeah.
This leads us to a wonderful question from Carol, and she wants to know if we do all of our own research.
Oh, what a good question. So for Anne Blair in particular, she has a really interesting institutional history here at Colonial Williamsburg. I'm not the first person to portray Anne Blair. In fact, I personally know 2 other women who portrayed Anne. And just this week, the Rockefeller Library posted, and research on Facebook posted that in '92, Anne Blair was featured as part of their Women's History Month programming. So Anne's been around a little while, which is really a treat for me to dig through some of the research that's already been done, and then do some of my own interpretation based on the resources that we do have, and then also to dig into new stuff that maybe we don't necessarily have on file. There are other people that I've researched before, though, that no one has portrayed before, so those end up being a little more, really have to start digging and searching. Sally Pelham is another woman that I have researched, and there's very little known about her mother here, and so it was a really exciting thing. It's exciting to find new stuff. I found a silhouette of her mom that's hanging out in Indiana.
Oh, wow.
So those sorts of things are new, and but it kind of depends on the past of the person here institutionally.
Yeah, that's true. I think a lot of times, because the people that we're portraying are people who aren't as well known, you somewhat become experts in your own character. And I'd say we have probably close to a dozen or so people who portray 40 plus different people. So a lot of times our information overlaps with each other.
Yeah.
So, I might find something that's beneficial to Michelle. She might find something that's beneficial to me. So it's a combination, but kind of once we have initially what we have about that person, we kind of take that and run with it, and become the Anne Blair or Hannah or what have you experts. We'd like to ask another question from Deb, and Deb would like to know, how do you choose Williamsburg residents to give voice to, like Anne Blair?
Sure. I'm interested to hear your answer too, Hope. Anne spoke to me pretty quickly. She's has a very strong personality in the letters that I have read of hers, and she interested me in a few ways. Her demographic, she's kind of unique for her demographic in that she didn't marry until she was 33, and kind of not unlike other women or ladies, but she definitely was doing what she wanted with her life for the majority of it. She's great fun to read her letters and her colorful language and her personality, strong personality. So there's a lot that drew me to Anne. That's Anne in particular, but
yeah, it's kind of a mix of things. Sometimes there is a need for certain types. I think all of us at some point in time were given primary characters, and that was who we portrayed most of the time. So that was a woman by the name of Eve that I received, who was a maidservant to Betty Randolph, Peyton Randolph's wife. There was also a need for another specific program. It was a tour looking at the life of a free Black woman who lived in Williamsburg. Now I was stepping into, like I said, I wasn't stepping into her shoes. I brought my own shoes. Edith Cumbo, who some of you may be familiar with, and I was like, I wouldn't want to do that tour as Edith. Let's see if there's another woman who kind of fits the type. So that's how I came to portray Elizabeth D. Rosario, who was a free Black woman who lived in Williamsburg. And sometimes when we're in a scene, we're a character for that set time. We're in a play, but we also end up portraying them when we step away from that play. So that's actually how I came to portray Hannah. I was portraying Hannah in a scene, but the scene happened, midday, but I was on the street, from 9 o'clock on. So I had to find out about Hannah, find out about her life, what have you. So usually it's to highlight a certain story that is important and that we want to tell. we have a question from Jenny, and this is a really good question that comes up a lot. Jenny wants to know, do you have to make things up for the purpose of having a full performance?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't think we ever make things up. We do have to often make very educated decisions on some of the people we portray or their full stories, because there are often gaps that we don't know a lot about. Even people who we do have more information about, really concrete information about, there are still gaps in their lives. And then there are other people where you have maybe one sentence or one date or just a name even, and then then the responsibility is to research around that person and learn what you can there from as many primary sources as you can, and then sort of build out from there and inform the decisions that you're making.
Yeah, we have to be very responsible
Yeah.
To the individuals we're portraying and to the history. So we always, if we can't find it out about that specific person, what we do is try to get something from another person's lived experience.
Yeah.
So when we exhaust all primary sources for that person and kind of the web of life happening around them, we look into secondary sources, people like them, what they would have done, what their life experiences would have been. So we do have to fill it in and put meat on the bones, but we always do it responsibly and still based in the history.
And always with the mind that things can change, that maybe there is new information you didn't have before, and the willingness to say, okay, this person that I've built in this particular way out of the information I did have, how does this new information affect it? And it's a really exciting thing, I think, to adapt and keep learning and letting these people grow as you learn more about them.
Yeah, you definitely have to be open to that, because there are things that I've changed in certain interpretations of individuals, so we go with the best choice at the time, but when the better choice comes, we have to be flexible and willing to make that better choice. Now we would like to move into another video segment where you learn a little bit about the rehearsal process. And again, we're going to ask you to stay with us. We'll be back in a couple of minutes, and think of any other questions you might have for myself or Michelle.
The rehearsal process for this piece was separate from the writing process. I spent months writing it, some agonizing weeks. And then the rehearsal process started after the script was finalized, after I felt good about where that was, knowing that it could shift some in the rehearsal process, which is pretty common. And I had the immense pleasure to have Katrina Lewis direct this piece. And Katrina, in this case, knew what I was thinking as we went, and was able to throw in staging and new ideas and new shapes to the thing to help it help what was just thoughts and paper read and make sense to an audience. The best discovery that we had during the rehearsal process was the use of accessories, 18th century accessories. I knew that I wanted some of that in there somehow, so I brought a bunch with me to rehearsal, and Katrina and I played around with what could they symbolize when you're putting on the role of society, the role that society expects of you, what happens when you strip it away. And that was a really a neat thing that we found really helped with the transitions, because this piece travels through time in a pretty extreme way. So it was a really fun thing to get really specific with how to use these articles of clothing to tell the story of time changing and shifting.
Thank you all so very much for sending your questions. I'm going to get right to them. Matt would like to know, do you collaborate on research with other historic sites like Mount Vernon?
Oh, what a good question. I personally haven't had that opportunity very much, but I think that it's so awesome, I think, to share information, and as research comes up, to be all have the ability to continue to tell stories better and better as we're able. I think it's an important thing make sure that information freely flows as we can.
We are in an area where there are a lot of museums, a lot of historic homes. So it's a natural outgrowth of preparing programs like My Story, My Voice. I know a program that I'm really excited about where we get to jump a little bit ahead of time that I'm working on with my husband, looking at Juneteenth programming. We have Fort Monroe down in Hampton, where some of the first contraband soldiers, came to fight for the Union Army. So there's been a lot of talks there. So we're in a really wonderful area for that to happen, and hopefully more in the future. We have a question from Brant's 5th grade class, and they want us to describe the other types of sources or resources that we use.
Sure. Well, for this particular program, for My Story, My Voice, as I was writing it, I was often in the room with you. Each section of her life, I was trying to explore how does a person get to the point in a slave society where they're able to look at another human being in front of them and see them as property, choose to see them as property instead of human. And what does it take to justify that, and what sort of influences throughout their life? So when I took these moments of Anne's life to explore that, I tried to use a primary source for each jumping off point for each section. And I did end up, there are a few where I used sermons of the time. If I didn't use a letter or a paper directly from Anne's family's life, I was using sermons of the time period, laws of the time period, court cases of the time period. I think everything in this particular program comes from a primary source, which is great. And then when you're sort of building a base of understanding, secondary sources play a huge part in that, learning of the rounding out of the society that we're in. And
it's like the more you research, the more you realize you need to know, and that's often the case. You think, well, we've answered this one question in research, so we're good. No, that one question usually leads to 20 more questions. So with the primary sources, some that I've used have been a great resource, are Runaway ads of people trying to self-liberate. There's a program I do where I speak as this woman from a Runaway ad, and that's the only information I have about her. So I started to look at everything around her world in Westmoreland County. I looked at her owner and any records that existed for him. It led me to a really interesting, event that I had never heard of before, and that was the Westmoreland slave plot, where, there were plenty of slave uprisings, but the punishment was something different, where this man who was leading the uprising was not killed, but was made to wear a heavy iron collar around his neck for the rest of his life. So even though I didn't have a lot of information, that fact alone was so striking to me. That kind of led to, the writing of the piece. So there's always primary sources if you kind of spread it out to look at what's happening in a person's world. We have a question from Kristen. Kristen would like to know, can you research multiple people at once? And if so, which person researched has been our favorite for both of us? Thank you for your question, Kristen.
You do research multiple people at once.
In
fact,
right?
Right now I have a few programs about to go up. One with Sally Carey Fairfax, one with Anne Blair. There's probably another one too. But when you are in that mode of researching and being ready to answer questions about these particular people and their lives, it can be a little tricky because you have to keep these dates of these different lives straight, and which brother is this? Who am I talking about right now? So it is often the case that we're working on multiple projects for multiple historic figures at the same time.
I think we often have to, and as far as a favorite person of the past, it's very difficult because I think a lot of times we portray different people because there's so many awesome and amazing stories to tell, and because these are people that aren't as well known, we usually have a lot of information around certain events with these individuals. But I would like to say I bring different pieces of my life and lived experience and even family members. Like one character, Fanny, is always speaking in proverbs and wit, and that is something that my grandfather would do all the time, and I still say, you know, some of his proverbs and sayings. So they all have a different story to tell, but they all become very near and dear to us.
You grow close with each of them.
You do, you do. So after you have written and rehearsed this piece, the next step is performance. So we're gonna take a look at another video about how this performance does come together. Keep sticking with us. We're gonna be back in a couple of minutes, and keep up with the questions. Thank you so much, and we'll see you in a couple minutes.
Preparing for this piece is often a little anxiety provoking for me. I don't know why. I don't get stage fright often. I've been performing for 20 plus years, and I don't often feel butterflies, but this one gets me every time. This one in particular, I do always run it before I run through everything. I step through it. I get it in my body and in my brain, and then I generally have to take a step away for a second and take do some breathing exercises, and then step on and do it, because once you hop on this one, you don't stop until it's done. So the audience reaction to my piece has been overwhelmingly, I would say, productive and positive. It's not a particularly warm and fuzzy piece. It's a difficult piece. And part of why I wrote it was to sort out some difficult questions that I'm always asking, and that I hope lots of people also are asking. In particular, how does one become steeped in the institution of slavery, particularly as a complicit white woman? How does one what are the influences on a person's life? So it's not an easy piece to process all the time, but I think that it almost always, I will say always, opens up an honest conversation, and that's my hope, is that conversation continues, whether it is comfy cozy or not. Yeah.
Thank you all so much, and again, thank you for your questions. We've got a lot of questions, so I'm going to jump right into it. This comes from Doug Breeze, and Doug would like to know how we work to present unbiased interpretation.
Oh, it's a good question. So we as humans have bias. So people of the past had bias as well. So it's always important to see where they are in the past, and then, you know, work with as honest an interpretation of their lives as possible. And we're always asking the question, what's relevant? And so we're always drawing the conclusion of, why are we talking about some of the things that we do talk about? Why is it important to explore these parts of Anne's life? And one answer to that from myself is that, you know, everything that a person of the past is capable of, good or bad or wonderful or excellent, I'm also capable of, and capable of learning from the past, and so that I, as a human, can do better moving forward. And so there's always something to learn from what the past teaches us, and what these people teach us from the past. So, yeah.
I think a lot of the time in portraying free and enslaved Black women, it's more about taking the documents that exist about them and getting rid of the bias in which the document was created. Right. And because that is the case oftentimes with most people in history, they're not recording their history themselves, and sometimes just the nature of the primary sources you get, like a lot of research that I do comes from Runaway ads of people who are just seeking to self-liberate, and there is definitely a lot of bias in these ads of slave owners not understanding, or, you know, couldn't know why a person ran off. They ran off unprovoked, what have you. So kind of looking at some of these descriptions, stripping away the bias to really get to the heart of the person that I'm portraying. And when you meet Hannah or Elizabeth or Eve, you meet her how she saw herself through her eyes, not how she was viewed through this already biased lens.
Yeah.
So thank you very much. We have a question from Susan, and Susan would like to know if we find ourselves remaining in character for a period of time following a performance.
Oh, I had a professor in school talk about that exact thing and how, especially if you're carrying something sort of heavy with you throughout a performance or throughout a program, the idea, they called it counting the bricks. So, and this was speaking about theater, but on the way into the theater, you count the bricks in. And then once you're there, you're able to portray the person you need to portray and say the words that are not necessarily your words or beliefs or thoughts. And then if it is, you're having trouble letting it go, you count the bricks on the way out as well. So on your way out of the building, by the time you get out, you find yourself again. And I think everyone has different tactics that are like counting the bricks, because it can be difficult to let some of this go at the end of the day, or even little things like saying good day.
Yes.
Sometimes you find yourself at the grocery store
Saying hello to everyone you meet. Yeah.
Hello. Like, wait a second. I just need my apples. I don't need to greet everyone I see.
Yeah, I think there's a definite line between performance and then stepping back into the 21st century. A lot of our programs, like the My Story, My Voices, we have time to sit by ourselves, not just to go over lines, but to just get us in the mindset. And then we usually have the opportunity after most of our programs to step back onto stage out of character and to take any questions that guests might have. And the great thing about My Story, My Voice is that we're not just answering questions, but we get to give you a little bit of information about how we came to the character, how we came to the moment in the character's life that we want to explore a little bit. So that takes us out of it. It can be very heavy. It can be very serious. You look for the moments of joy that existed in these individuals' lives, very difficult lives, but they survived nonetheless. So I try to make a clear, distinct break. And what I find the most difficult is not necessarily letting go of the person that I have just portrayed. Is sometimes when you return back to the 21st century, you see how some things have changed, but a lot of things have not changed. Yeah. So thank you for the question. And Bridget, thank you for your question, because it kind of goes right into that. Bridget would like to know how we deal with portraying problematic historic figures or with testing problematic aspects of historic people mentally and emotionally.
Yeah. So I talked a little bit about that. I think for me, exploring all parts of a person is what's important, So I think we have a tendency, especially with, we have a tendency to look back at people, even people in our own lives that we're recalling how they are or they were, and to pick bad things or to pick good things and say this is bad and this is good. But we as humans are often a whole lot more complex than that. It's not always that simple. Motive is not simple. Intention is not simple. Perception is generally pretty straightforward, how someone else feels when you act a certain way. So it's the same thing. Like I said, everything that's humanity is unchanging, and a lot of the things that I think and feel are possibly things that Anne Blair thought and felt and pondered about and wrestled with. And so I think looking at these people that we've never met, but maybe we've read their words, as full humans, as the whole representation of the human experience is how I approach it.
We have a question from Christopher, and Christopher would like to know what has been your favorite experience with guests and what inspires you all to do what you do.
Oh,
thank you, Christopher.
Gosh.
That's excellent question.
There's so many good moments.
There are
powerful moments, and I think I can't think of one exactly, but
I think a lot of times we're not just telling people things they didn't know, but we're asking people to think differently about things that they learn and to kind of change their thoughts and ideas about things that they've learned from people that they've loved and they've trusted. And for me, why I do what I do is the lives of these women that I portray, these free and enslaved Black women, is so important. And anytime we get to call these individuals to remembrance, anytime, sometimes all we have is a name, but when we have a document with a person's name, we're calling that person's name, presence, life, existence into remembrance. And I think that's very, very important. And it's necessary and it's urgent because we're at a time where this is a history that people may not receive anywhere else if they don't come to visit us at Colonial Williamsburg, if they don't join us on our live streams. And for these women that I portray, they were probably subjected to a certain amount of disrespect in their life, disregard. They probably became invisible to a lot of the people that were around them. How awful would that be for that to continue now, 3 centuries later, for these women, their lives and their stories to just be disrespected, to not be remembered, and to become invisible. So I feel it's very crucial. My sister is an archivist, and she talks about the work she does, and she unifies it with the work that we do, Michelle, and she calls it memory work. And I think that caps not only what we do, but a lot of the resources that we've talked about, where we have historians, and we have an artistic director, and we have trainers, and we have people who work at other museums. And you all, by joining us in this live stream, you're participating in that memory work by keeping alive the memories of Anne Blair and of Hannah and of Sally and of Eve. So I feel like it's crucial, it's important, and these ladies, they deserve it.
Yeah, well said.
Yeah, thank you. Now we have a question about the difference between portraying real historic characters between composite figures.
Yeah, so a composite figure is a person who we don't know this exact person existed, but we do know that many, many people existed like her. And sometimes we do use that opportunity to tell a story, tell a story that we might not have a lot of facts about one individual, but we can use all of the information to still tell their stories, no matter. Whereas people like Anne Blair, or we have a good bit more information, so it's fairly concrete. A concrete person we know existed.
Yeah. So we're using the historic facts to build a person who fits the mold of a lot of different historic facts that kind of belong to a lot of different people. Now we have one final question. Stacy would like to know, how can I see my story, my voice?
What a good question. This program, and it's not just Anne Blair that you'd get to meet. There are a handful of really excellent stories that you'd get to hear, and then have the opportunity to talk a little bit like we are today with the performers about their process and the people they bring to life. And that program happens through March and April on Thursdays and Sundays, and then Thursday through Sunday in May, and then there are a few dates in June. So check the website, check the app, Colonial Williamsburg Explorer app. It's free, and there are others that charge you. They're not ours. And yeah, check there. You can see the times. They're 4 o'clock at the Charlton stage throughout those dates. You're in for a treat, no matter who you catch.
And we hope that you get to visit us in person to see some of these My Story, My Voice programs. We thank you for joining us for this live stream, and we would like to conclude how we started by looking at another portion of Michelle's My Story, My Voice. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
Bless, O Lord, my rest this night. Bless those that I love. Bless Father and my sisters and my brothers. And bless Fanny. God, I have been wondering upon a topic. I know that you made this world, and you made everyone in this world, and you have placed everyone in this world according to your will. And I have been told that my place is that of mistress, and Fanny's is that of slave. And I wonder, God, can this be right? Those who study philosophy say that slavery is abhorrent and a peculiar institution, and might not Fanny want some substance of her own in this world? Help me to understand my place in it, for I find it to be troublesome. And help me to find a husband. Fanny. Fanny, love is such a fickle beast. Have you seen all of the young people of the city dancing and cooing over one another? Whoa. They practically scrape the skin off their shins, stumbling over the pews, trying to woo one another at church. I've always said everyone is made a fool by love. I suppose I should like a husband one day. We shall see if I ever allow myself to be made a fool by love. Father, have you a moment to discuss a topic? I should like to discuss the topic of free Negroes. You won the court case recently with Matthew Ashby and his family. Matthew was able to purchase his wife and children and petition the governor's council to free them, yes? Or does that mean that anyone could free their Negroes? Well, if the law is not yet ready to support this regularly, perhaps this case will serve as a precedent. Although, I cannot imagine why everyone would free their Negroes. How would this city or any other function in any prosperous manner? Thank you for your guidance, Father.
Please check the schedule and join us for My Story, My Voice on the Charlton stage at 4 o'clock throughout the spring season.
Thank you to our generous guests and donors. This project was funded in part by a generous grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities.